At the Hargrove Medical Center fundraiser gala, a woman sat alone at a corner table near the silent auction display, her posture straight, her navy dress unremarkable in a room full of sequins and cufflinks. 3 people had passed her in the last 10 minutes. One asked if she could clear his dessert plate. One asked where the coat room was. The third, a man in a rented tuxedo who had clearly not worn one in some time, handed her his drink ticket without looking and moved on toward the open bar. She took the ticket. She set it on the table beside her untouched water glass. She looked at the chandelier. The side entrance opened. A man in a clean but clearly not new jacket came in with a girl of about 7 on his hip, her dress slightly wrinkled on one side where she had fallen asleep in the car. He stopped just inside the door, adjusted his daughter's weight, and looked across the room. His eyes moved past the chandeliers and the flower arrangements and the tables of people who had dressed for the occasion. They stopped when they reached the corner. He crossed the room. He stopped at her table. He set his daughter down on the chair across from her and said, "This is Peanut. She is going to eat whatever dessert they bring out, and then she's going to fall asleep again. You look like someone who would not mind the company of a person who does not talk much." Before we go further, hit the subscribe button below and let us know in the comments where you are watching from tonight. 3 weeks before the gala, on a Wednesday morning in late September, Calvin Pruitt was on his knees in the hallway of a unit on the 4th floor of Hargrove Medical Center, replacing a threshold strip that had been pulling loose from the floor since the previous winter. The job had taken him 40 minutes. The actual cost in materials was $11. He had put it off because the hallway was narrow and the light was bad, and he always ended up doing it between patient transports, timing each section around the sound of wheels coming down the corridor. He had been on the facilities crew at Hargrove for 6 years. Before that, he had done 2 years of a civil engineering program at a state school in Tennessee, before his daughter's mother left her, and he had recalculated everything. Nora was 7 now. On mornings he had her, she ate cereal at the kitchen counter and did not talk to him until she had finished, which he respected because he was the same way. On mornings he did not have her, the apartment was very quiet and he arrived at work early. He was tamping down the last edge of the threshold strip when a pair of wheels rolled past him and stopped. "That has been pulling up since February," the woman in the wheelchair said. She was looking down at his work, not at him. "I know," Calvin said. "I got to it." She looked at the strip. "The adhesive on the right side is going to lift again. The subfloor is bowed." He looked at her. She was maybe 35, in the kind of clothes that suggested she had come from an office rather than a patient room. She was not wearing a visitor badge. She was not wearing a staff badge either. "You work here," he said. "I am visiting," she said. She rolled on. He pressed the right edge of the strip down harder and knew she was correct. Her name was Simone Vance. She had been the president and chief executive of Vance Health Infrastructure for 11 months, a position she had taken over from her father when his Parkinson's had progressed past the point where he could chair a board meeting without his hands shaking through the numbers. Her father, Gerald Vance, had spent 40 years acquiring and improving regional medical facilities in the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast. Simone had spent the last 8 years of those 40 in the seat beside him, learning everything he knew about what made a hospital work for the people inside it. The wheelchair was not new to her life. A horse she had trusted had thrown her 4 years earlier on a trail outside Asheville. The break had been catastrophic, and the recovery had been long, and the outcome had been permanent. What had changed was not her understanding of hospitals. It was the angle from which she arrived at them. Hargrove Medical Center was the largest holding in her father's portfolio and the one he had loved most carefully. A donor gala was scheduled for the 3rd Friday in October. The board had been pushing for a major capital campaign. Simone had been pushing back because the capital campaign numbers she had been shown assumed an occupancy and throughput the facility could not currently support. She had been visiting every week for 6 weeks. She had never told anyone who she was when she arrived. She had come through the main entrance, the side entrance, the accessible entrance on the east side, where the automatic door had a 2-second delay that she had timed 3 times with her watch. She had sat in the second-floor waiting area on a Tuesday afternoon and listened to what families talked about while they waited. She had used every elevator and found the one that announced floors in a voice too quiet to hear if you had any hearing loss at all. She had been in the hallway on the 4th floor to check whether the physical therapy overflow space had been cleared since her last visit. The man on his knees had been the first person in 6 weeks to answer her observation directly instead of apologetically. On the morning of the gala, she was at her desk in the Vance offices on the 14th floor of a building 12 blocks from Hargrove, reading through the facility assessment she had been building since August. Her chief of operations, a man named Douglas Keel, came in with a revised donor seating chart and set it on top of the assessment. "You are at table 1, he said. "I am aware. There will be photographers. The board is expecting you to make the rounds." Simone looked at the seating chart. "I will make the rounds, Douglas. I am not going to perform them." Douglas had worked for Gerald Vance for 9 years before he had worked for Simone for 11 months. He had learned that when she said something quietly, she had usually already said it loudly inside her own head and was offering him the edited version. He took back the seating chart. "The remarks are at 8:15, he said. "You are on after the board chair." "I know." She went back to the assessment. The 4th floor threshold strip was in a separate column she had labeled Deferred Maintenance, Visible Friction Points. She had 41 items in that column. The gala was funding a new cardiac wing. She had told the board 3 weeks ago that the building did not need a new wing. It needed the 41 things in her column fixed and 4 structural modifications to the existing patient flow. The board had thanked her for her input and moved forward with the cardiac wing announcement. That evening she had arrived at the gala early and done the thing she always did in large rooms. Found the corner that let her see the whole space without being squarely in it. The table near the silent auction cases was hers for the quarter hour before her remarks. She called it thinking time. She knew it was also armor. When the man with the wrinkled daughter arrived at her table and said what he said, she looked at him for a long moment. He was not looking at her chair. He was looking at the chandelier above her with the mild expression of a man who had decided the chandelier was not particularly interesting. "How old is Peanut?" she said. "7, he said. "She answers to Nora when she is awake. When she is asleep, she answers to nothing." Nora, head now against the tablecloth, did not stir to confirm this. "Sit down," Simone said. His name, she would learn later, was Calvin. He told her he worked at the facility. He did not specify in what capacity. He told her his daughter had been a patient here 18 months ago, a respiratory thing that had turned serious fast, and that he had driven the same roads that night, that he had driven every shift for 2 years. Except that night, the roads had meant something different. He said he had donated to the gala every year since because it seemed like the right kind of math. Simone said, "What did your daughter think of being a patient here?" Calvin looked at Nora. "She said the call button took too long. She is 7. She is also correct. It averaged 6 minutes on her floor." "I know," Simone said. He looked at her. The ballroom lights shifted. The board chair moved to the podium. Introductions began. Simone folded her hands on the table and waited for her name. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and Chief Executive of Vance Health Infrastructure, the woman who has underwritten 40% of Hargrove Medical Center's operating endowment for the last fiscal year, Ms. Simone Vance." The room turned. Calvin did not look at her right away. He looked at Nora, who had opened one eye. "Daddy," Nora said. "Is that the lady?" He looked then. Simone was already rolling toward the front of the room. "Go back to sleep, Peanut," he said. She did. He watched Simone reach the low stage that had been constructed at accessible height. He watched her take the microphone. He heard her speak for 9 minutes about what a hospital owed the people inside it, not the people cutting its ribbons. He heard the room go quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone is saying something inconvenient and accurate. He heard scattered applause that grew uncertain and then grew again when it found its footing. He drove home with Nora asleep in the back seat and did not think about it again until he was washing the one dish he had used that evening and realized he had never told her his name. The following Monday, Calvin was on the roof access level replacing a ventilation coupling when Douglas Keel appeared at the top of the stairwell with a tablet and an expression that suggested the roof was not where he had expected to be at 10 in the morning. "Pruitt," Douglas said. "Facilities?" "Yes. M's. Vance has asked for a full walkthrough assessment. Structural, mechanical, accessibility, patient flow. She wants it done by someone who works in the building, not a consultant who visited twice." Calvin looked at the coupling. "I have a schedule. Your supervisor has been notified. This takes precedence." Douglas looked at his tablet. She wants to start on the 4th floor. Calvin came down from the roof. They met in the 4th floor hallway. Simone was already there when he arrived, parked near the threshold strip he had fixed 2 weeks earlier. She looked at it when he came around the corner. Still holding, she said. Right side lifted a little, he said. I reset it Thursday. She nodded. Show me the building. What followed was 4 hours that felt nothing like a facilities inspection and very much like a conversation that had been waiting to happen. She asked questions Calvin had never been asked by anyone in the 14 months since the previous director of operations had retired. Where was the longest walking distance between the two most frequently combined services on each floor? Which elevators ran slowest under full load? Where did staff consistently prop open doors that were supposed to be closed, and why? He answered each one directly. When he did not know the answer, he said so, and then gave her his best estimate and the reasoning behind it. She wrote nothing down. She had Douglas for that. On the 2nd floor in the long east corridor, she stopped at a nurse's station and asked the charge nurse, a woman named Patrice, who had been at Hargrove for 19 years, what she would fix first if she had a week and an unlimited budget. Patrice looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has been asked a hypothetical that is not actually hypothetical, and answered without hesitating. The medication dispensing stations were in the wrong locations for the way patient assignments were actually distributed, and everyone had known it for 8 years, and nothing had happened because the stations had been installed during a capital project, and no one wanted to admit the capital project had made a structural error. Simone looked at Calvin. Did you know that? I knew where the stations were. I did not know the history. Now you do. She thanked Patrice and rolled to the next corridor. At the end of the east wing, a man in a suit appeared from the direction of the administrative offices. His name was Whitmore Giles. He was 61 years old, the longest-serving board member at Hargrove, and a man who had been involved in every capital campaign the facility had run in the last 20 years. He had not been at the gala because he had been at a conference in Atlanta, which Simone had known and had chosen as the gala date deliberately, a fact she had told no one. Simone, he said, extending his hand, I did not know you were coming in today. I come in frequently, she said. His eyes moved to Calvin. And this is? Facilities, Calvin said. Whitmore's expression adjusted in the small way that expressions adjust when a category has been assigned. He looked back at Simone. I wanted to discuss the cardiac wing timeline. The contractor has a window in the spring that the cardiac wing is not moving forward in the current form, Simone said. Whitmore was quiet for 3 seconds. The board voted. The board will vote again. I have a revised proposal. Douglas has the calendar for a session. Whitmore looked at the corridor, at the ceiling, at a point somewhere between them. Your father believed in this project, Simone. My father believed in this building, she said. He built it so it would last and work for everyone in it. Those are not always the same thing. Whitmore walked back toward the administrative offices. Calvin watched him go. When the corridor was empty, Simone said without looking at him, Thank you for not agreeing with him. He did not ask me anything, Calvin said. No, she said. He did not. She moved down the corridor, the second elevator bank. Show me the load rating. 3 weeks after the gala on a Thursday evening, Calvin was at the kitchen table with Nora doing the kind of homework that required colored pencils and a level of strategic support that he was barely qualified to provide. Nora was drawing a diagram of a habitat. She had chosen a tide pool. She was very serious about the accuracy of the hermit crab. Dad, she said, not looking up, is that lady the boss of the hospital? Calvin straightened the purple pencil she was not using. She is the boss of the company that owns the hospital. Nora considered this. So she is the boss of the boss, roughly. Nora added a detail to the hermit crab that suggested she had been thinking about crustacean anatomy in her own time. She seemed sad at the party. She seemed like someone who had a lot on her mind. That is how you seem when you are sad. Calvin did not answer this immediately. He handed her the blue pencil for the water. He thought about what to say and chose the truth because she was 7 and would eventually be older. I think she carries some things that are hard to carry, like most people do. Nora nodded with the gravity of a person who has been told something they already suspected. I liked her, she said, and went back to the hermit crab. That same evening, 11 floors above street level in the Vance offices, Simone was at her desk with the walkthrough notes Douglas had transcribed and the facility assessment she had been building since August, and a third document she had started that afternoon, a revised capital proposal that redirected the cardiac wing budget into the 41 items in her deferred friction column, plus the 4 structural modifications she had identified and 2 additional ones that Calvin's building knowledge had uncovered during the walkthrough. The cardiac wing, her father had named it in his mind before he had ever proposed it. He had drawn the footprint himself on a yellow legal pad at a board dinner 6 years ago. The pad was still in a frame on the wall of his home study. She understood what the name meant to him. She understood what it meant to the board members who had been in that room at that dinner. She also understood that the building was turning away patients with mobility needs from 3 separate service lines because of infrastructure failures that a new wing would not address and might worsen. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside, her father's original facility report from 1987, the year he had acquired Hargrove. It was typewritten, bound in a thin cardboard cover, and annotated in his handwriting in the margins. She had read it twice before she took the job and once since. The first sentence of the executive summary read, "A medical facility is only as good as what it can actually do for the person standing in front of it, not the person it was built for. The person standing in front of it today." She had used a version of that sentence in her remarks at the gala. She had not attributed it to him because attribution in that room would have sounded like sentiment, and she had not wanted to give Whitmore Giles the satisfaction of a reason to dismiss what she was saying. She closed the report. She looked at the proposal on her desk. She thought about the medications dispensing stations that had been in the wrong place for 8 years. She thought about the threshold strip that had been pulling up since February and had taken one facilities worker 40 minutes to fix once it had actually been addressed. She thought about a man who had given a drink ticket to a woman at a corner table without looking at her and kept walking. She signed the revised proposal and emailed it to Douglas to distribute before the board session. 6 weeks after the gala, on a Tuesday morning, the Vance Health Infrastructure Board convened for an emergency session. Whitmore Giles sat to Simone's left. Board chair, a woman named Helen Krause, who had known Gerald Vance for 30 years and had been watching his daughter carefully for 11 months, sat at the head of the table. Whitmore had spent 3 weeks preparing what he believed was an airtight argument. The cardiac wing had named donors. It had a contractor timeline. It had architectural renderings that had already been shown to 2 local media outlets. To withdraw it now, he said, would damage the institution's credibility with every donor community in the region. He spoke for 11 minutes. He used the phrase, "your father's vision," 4 times. Simone waited. When he finished, she opened a folder and distributed a single page to each board member. It was not the revised proposal. It was a single column of numbers. Read mission rates corrected for the 4 service lines most affected by the infrastructure failures she had documented. The numbers were compared to the regional average. They were not comparable favorably. "These are patients who came to this building and then came back," she said. "In most cases, within 30 days. The reasons are documented. The common thread is friction in the facility itself, not in the clinical care. The clinical care at Hargrove is excellent. The building is working against it." She paused. "A cardiac wing will serve patients we do not yet have. These numbers are patients we already failed." Helen Krause looked at the page for a long time. She looked at Whitmore. She looked at Simone. "The revised proposal," Helen said. "What is the timeline?" 18 months to complete all 43 items. The first phase, the highest friction points, can be operational within 6 months. Whitmore said, "The named donors. I have spoken individually with the 4 named donors," Simone said. 3 of them have agreed to redirect their gifts to the revised project. The 4th requested time to consider, and I expect to speak with them again on Thursday. Whitmore looked at the end of the table. He looked at the page in his hand. "This is not what your father would have done." Simone did not look away from him. "My father taught me to ask what the building needed, not what looked good in a press release." The vote was 7-2. Whitmore voted against. The other dissenting vote was a man who had been on the board for 3 months and did not know enough yet to have a considered opinion, which Simone made a note to address before the next session. Afterward, the boardroom emptied slowly. Helen Krause paused at the door. "He would be proud," she said. "In case that matters." "It matters," Simone said. The door closed. The room was quiet. 3 floors below, Calvin was replacing a light fixture in the administrative corridor when Douglas Keel came around the corner and said, "The board approved the revised infrastructure proposal." Calvin looked at the fixture. All 43 items, all 43. He replaced the cover plate. He picked up his bag. He thought about the threshold strip, the elevator, the medication dispensing stations, the 18 other things on his mental list that had crossed the formal list. The things that a person learned about a building only by being inside it every day. "When does it start?" he said. "Phase 1 kicks off in 8 weeks, Douglas said. "Mrs. Vance is requesting that you be part of the implementation team." Calvin looked at him. Douglas had the expression of a man who found this unusual but had stopped trying to categorize it. "All right," Calvin said. On a Saturday afternoon in February, Nora was in the Hargrove 4th floor family waiting room with a book she was not reading and a cup of apple juice that was mostly ice. She had come with Calvin to the facility because the alternative was staying with a neighbor who had a cat that made her sneeze. She had sat in approximately this configuration, book plus juice plus patience, since she was old enough to sit still, which had been earlier than most children in Calvin's experience. Simone had come through the 4th floor on a Phase 1 review and found her there. She stopped. "You were at the gala." Nora looked up. "You gave a speech. Dad says you were saying things people needed to hear. Your dad is generous. He is accurate," Nora said with the precision of someone correcting a misattribution. "He does not give compliments that are not true. I know because I tried to tell him my drawing was good once when it was not very good, and he told me which part needed more work." Simone was quiet for a moment. "What are you reading?" Nora showed her the cover. It was a book about structural engineering for middle-grade readers, which she was 2 years below the target age for, and which she had been working through since December. "My dad has books like this," Nora said. "With the math parts, does he let you read those?" "He lets me look at the pictures. He says the math parts will make more sense when I know more math." "He is right about that," Simone said. Nora scooted one seat over on the bench. Simone looked at the space. She rolled into it. They sat for 20 minutes. Simone read 2 pages of the structural engineering book over Nora's shoulder, which Nora allowed without comment. Calvin came around the corner from the elevator bank, saw them, and stopped 6 feet away without either of them noticing. He stood there for a moment. He thought about a waiting room 18 months ago on a floor below this one. He thought about the particular mathematics of a building and what it owed the people inside it. He thought about a woman at a corner table who had taken a drink ticket from a stranger and set it down without anger. He walked up. "Peanut," he said. "You bothering Ms. Vance?" "No," Nora said. "She sat with me." Simone looked at him. "She is teaching me about load distribution and cantilevered floor systems." "Got that from the picture," Calvin said. "She does not know the math yet." "I understand the concept," Nora said with dignity. "The math is a formality." Simone did not look away from Calvin when she said, "Your daughter is going to be a problem for a lot of people in the best possible way." He sat down on the bench beside the two of them. Nora, deciding the social portion of the afternoon was concluded, went back to her book. Calvin looked at the corridor. The threshold strip on the far end of the hall was fresh, new adhesive, correct subfloor this time. One of the first 20 items completed. "How is it going?" Simone said. "The east elevator is running 8 seconds faster under full load since we replaced the counterweight assembly." I noticed. Of course she had. He looked at her and she was already looking down the corridor with the expression of a person who was always tallying things even when she appeared to be at rest. "My wife," he said. He did not know why he said it then. He had not planned to. "She left when Nora was 4 months old. There was not a dramatic reason. She had decided it was not what she wanted, and I think she had known it for a while before she told me. She is in Oregon now. Nora sees her twice a year. It is fine, mostly. Nora is fine." He looked at Nora, who was not listening or was listening in the way she sometimes listened to things she decided to store for later. "I do not tell people that usually," he said. "I am not sure why I told you." "Because I did not ask," Simone said. He thought about that. It was accurate. "My father," she said. "He ordered the chair I use now through a medical equipment supplier about 6 months after my accident. He never told me anything about who designed it or where it came from. I think he did not want me to feel like I owed anyone a particular kind of gratitude. I found out last year doing a supplier audit that the design was patented by a researcher at a university program he had funded for a decade. He had known who built it. He just believed some things did not need to be announced. Calvin looked at the chair. It was a narrow frame, well machined, the angles slightly different from the standard. An engineer's chair. He sounds like someone who thought a long time before he acted, he said. He did, she said, and then he acted and did not discuss it further. Nora turned a page. The corridor was quiet the way a building is quiet on a Saturday, not empty but unhurried. You could come over for dinner, Calvin said. Not a formal thing. Nora makes the salad, which means the salad has croutons in every possible size. I make the rest. What is the rest? Whatever is in the refrigerator and whatever Nora cannot be argued out of requesting. Last week it was soup with grilled cheese. The week before, pasta with a sauce she describes as spicy, which it is not. It is a little spicy, Nora said without looking up. Simone looked at the book in Nora's hands. She looked at the corridor. She looked at Calvin. All right, she said. The ramp at the front of Calvin's building was not new but was solid. 2-inch cedar planks with a non-slip edge strip he had added the previous autumn, before the idea of dinner had existed, because the building had needed it. She went up it without slowing. He noticed that he did not offer a hand. She noticed that he did not offer one. Nora made the salad with great seriousness and a quantity of croutons that was technically inadvisable. She placed it on the table with the pride of someone delivering a completed technical report. Calvin made pasta. He did, in fact, add a small quantity of something warm to the sauce that Nora insisted was pepper, and that was, Simone determined after the second bite, actually a very small amount of smoked paprika. Nora says spicy, Calvin said. I say dimension. I say you are both technically correct, Simone said. Nora accepted this diplomatic verdict and ate her pasta. After dinner, Nora fell asleep on the couch with the structural engineering book open across her chest, which seemed to Calvin like the most accurate possible portrait of his daughter. He put a blanket over her without moving the book. He came back to the table. Simone had moved her chair so she could see the window. The streetlights were on. The neighborhood was quiet on a Saturday night, in the way that neighborhoods are quiet when the people in them have settled in for the evening. My father used to say, she said, that the best thing you could do for a building was understand it as it was, not as you planned it. You had to walk every corridor before you could know where the problems were. He was right, Calvin said. He also said it about other things. He just used building language because that was the language he trusted. Calvin set his hands flat on the table. He thought about the 4th floor. He thought about 18 months ago. He thought about the particular way some nights were different from other nights, not because anything had announced itself, but because something had shifted in the way the room felt. I was here, he said, the night Nora was sick. The real sick, not the regular kind. I drove these streets in the dark and I walked into that building and I sat in a waiting room for 3 hours and I thought about what I would give, if I could give anything, for the people in that building to know what they were doing. And they did. They absolutely did. And I thought, that is the thing worth protecting. He looked at her. She was already looking at him. I did not know at the time, he said, that the building would be in the picture. The building was always in the picture, she said. You just had not met it yet. He moved his hand across the table. He did not close the distance all the way. He left it in the space between them where it could be seen. She put her hand on the table, not on his, close to it. The streetlights did the slow work that streetlights do. 7 months after the gala, on a clear October evening, the renovated East Wing of Hargrove Medical Center opened with a small reception for staff, long-term patients, and a short list of people who had helped make it what it was. The cardiac wing announcement had been formally withdrawn from the capital campaign. The press had covered it briefly and without warmth. The 43 items had been covered not at all, which was how Simone had preferred it. She spoke for 6 minutes. She thanked the facilities team by department. She thanked the clinical staff. She thanked the board, which she did carefully and accurately, without surplus warmth. She thanked her father, who was in the second row in a good chair, his hands folded in his lap and his eyes very bright. Then she said, without it having been on any printed program, "There is one person I want to ask to come up here tonight. He is listed in the project documents as facilities lead, implementation team. He would have stayed in that description without objection. I am asking him forward anyway." Calvin was standing near the back of the room with Nora on one side of him, holding the hand of a woman from pediatrics who had taken a liking to her during the walkthrough phase and had, over the subsequent months, become something close to a personal mascot to the East Wing crew. Nora, who had been waiting for something without knowing exactly what, tightened her grip on Calvin's hand and used her other hand to push him slightly forward by the elbow. He straightened. He walked toward the front of the room. He stood beside Simone. He looked at the room. He thought for a moment. A building that works, he said, is one where nobody notices what was fixed. They just move through it. That is the whole job. He stepped back. The room was quiet for a beat. Then it was not. Gerald Vance clapped from the second row with his tremoring hands, and the sound of it, quiet and persistent, was the first sound that reached the back of the room. Whitmore Giles was not present. He had resigned from the board 3 months earlier following the capital campaign redirection, and the manner of his departure had been the tidiest thing he had done in the preceding year. Nora, from the back of the room, standing on her chair to see, pumped one fist at her side in a gesture of absolute private celebration that no one noticed except Calvin, who noticed everything, and Simone, who had been watching the back of the room the whole time. 6 months after the opening, on a Sunday afternoon, when the magnolias along the hospital drive were at the particular edge of their blooming that meant another week at most. 3 people walked a route that Calvin had suggested, and that Nora had agreed to on the condition that they stop for ice cream, which they did because it was a reasonable condition. Nora was 10 feet ahead, as she had been 10 feet ahead for most of her life. She had a cone and strong opinions about which flavor she had chosen and whether it had been the correct choice, a question she was working through by eating it very thoughtfully. Simone rolled beside Calvin. They had been doing this, walking together in different configurations of together, for 7 months now. There had been 4 floor walkthroughs that had ended with coffee. There had been a pediatric staff lunch that Nora had attended in an unofficial capacity and charmed 3 nurses into giving her supplies for a model she was building. There had been 2 Sundays where Calvin had driven to the Vance offices and sat in the chair across from her desk and talked about the building and then about other things while the city did its Sunday work outside the window. Phase 3 sign-off is next week, Calvin said. I know. I read the report, all 43 plus the 2 we added in November. He nodded. 45, she said. Nora turned around, walking backward, which she did when she had something to report. The ice cream was the right choice, she said. I was worried about the second flavor, but the first flavor was correct. Good data, Calvin said. I do not have enough samples to be sure, Nora said. I will need to come back. She turned forward again and went after a pigeon that was not going to be caught and did not appear to be worried about this. Simone looked at her. Calvin looked at her, looking at his daughter. She asked me last week, Simone said, whether the hospital would ever add a whole floor of things to do while you were waiting. I told her that was not how it worked. She said that was a design problem. She says that about most things. She is usually right. He did not answer this because she was right, and he had long since stopped needing to narrate when she was right. Gerald asked about you, Simone said. Last Tuesday when I had lunch with him. He asked if the facilities lead was still on the project. What did you tell him? I told him you were. She paused. He said, good. He said the building needed someone who knew it from the inside. Calvin looked at the hospital drive, at the magnolias, at Nora, who was now in conversation with the pigeon, from a distance of approximately 4 feet. Thank you, he said, for what you put your name behind, for what you did not let them walk over. It was the right thing. It was also a hard thing. She was quiet, the way she was quiet when she had considered something all the way through and had nothing to add because the conclusion was settled. My father never told me about the researcher who designed my chair, she said. He funded the work because he believed in it. He commissioned the chair because he trusted the craft. He let me find out on my own time because he believed some things mattered more when you arrived at them yourself. Calvin looked at the chair she was in, the same one she had brought to the gala, the same narrow frame, the machined angles, the design that had been thought through by someone who understood what it needed to do. I think he was right about that, he said. So do I. Nora, having concluded negotiations with the pigeon, came back at a run with 2 additional yards of energy that suggested the ice cream had been fully processed. Dad, she said, there are 7 pigeons and I think they are a family. That is a reasonable hypothesis, Calvin said. I need to observe them longer to be sure. We can walk past them again. Nora weighed this. She looked at Simone. Do you want to observe the pigeons? Simone looked at her with the full gravity the question deserved. Yes, she said. I do. Nora turned and led them back toward the pigeons, with the authority of a 7-year-old conducting a field study. Calvin walked at Simone's left side, close enough to be near, far enough not to crowd. The magnolias held for one more week. The building behind them, all 45 items addressed, stood in the afternoon light and did quietly what a building is supposed to do. Let people move through it without announcing what it had cost to get that way.